Hey dudes, it's Lerald, and this is my Spark Surfcaster build for the Legacy of Phrecia event. Spark is a really fun skill, it's super easy to use, you just hold down the right mouse button or whatever you bind it to, and everything dies. It's kind of brain dead in a good way. It's super dominant in PoE 2, and it's got a lot of fans in PoE 1 as well. Spark is normally a skill that people are kind of scared to league start unless they're playing a Hierophant using mana stacking to get enough single target damage through Archmage, but I think the Surfcaster Ascendancy gets so much power early on that it's going to be able to make Spark absolutely fly through the entire campaign. So because Surfcaster is just such a fast Ascendancy that's able to combine chill and shock really effectively, I felt like flooding the screen with spark projectiles that can also chill and freeze just seemed like a really good idea. This is a build that's going to be an amazing map blaster. I feel really confident about that. As for how it'll work on bossing, I honestly don't know, but I did the campaign as a Shadow with a very weak setup to simulate kind of the worst case scenario, and I thought it went really well, so I think that the real thing is going to be absolutely fantastic. I also have an in-game transition laid out to make this build extremely strong on a higher budget once you've farmed up some gear, and I'm doing a bit of a throwback to one of my favorite build archetypes ever, a power charge stacking assassin. So let's just go ahead and get into it. And we'll start with kind of the first most obvious thing here, Spark. You know, what is it? Why is it good? I mean, you're looking at it, baby. It's a spell, you press the button, and it throws a bunch of lightning projectiles out. So if I jump into an area that has some more hallways, you could really see why Spark is so good. It bounces around between walls. If you get into like a nice tight corner, you can just really slam like a billion Spark projectiles into enemies and just absolutely shred them into like electrified nothingness. So one super important component of Spark, as I could show off in the tree here, is getting Pierce on it. The way that it's actually functions is it throws out these little lightning balls that are, technically speaking, they're projectiles. They don't have an AoE tag on them. They are projectiles, and they can penetrate through enemies, you know, with Pierce. So coming down and getting piercing shots very quickly is super valuable. This is something that Hierophant builds don't get access to because they're all the way up here. So they have to like put Pierce as a support gem in, and you can do that for the first like handful of levels, but you pretty much want to make your way down here and take piercing shots pretty much right off the bat in the process of leveling, and then that frees up a whole skill gem or support gem slot pretty much for the entirety of the campaign. Stormbrand also scales really well with projectile speed and with duration, so you want to pick up things like more skill effect duration and projectile speed around the tree and around the rest of your character's gear and build and so on, and that'll make it so that these sparks are just lasting forever and bouncing around and, you know, just really shredding enemies, especially in more confined spaces. So just to kind of hit on the setup that I used in the campaign, I had very busted gear. I did play around with a couple of like very basic uniques once I got out of the campaign here, but like most of my gear in the campaign was like true garbage. I think I got to the end of Act 3 and realized I was still basically wearing like mostly blues. But the main thing I wanted to emphasize here is I specifically didn't take Polymath. I didn't come and take like Spellbreaker or Soul Drinker or even Swift Killer. I took like very bad nodes. I took one step ahead for the increased action speed to like vaguely simulate what it would be like to have the like extra action speed from Reverse Chill, sort of. But then I took Heartstopper and Escape Artist, like just truly defensive nodes, so that I would really like try to minimize my damage throughout the campaign just to see how that would compare to the Surfcaster. This feels like it is a much weaker build as I have set it up, you know, doing it wrong on purpose as a joke, essentially. And it still worked pretty well throughout the campaign, so I was pretty happy with that. So now just to kind of hit on the Surfcaster Ascendancy, the first node you're going to take 1000%, no matter what build you're playing, is Ghost to the Deep. This is going to be the best leveling node in the entirety of not just the tree, but the entire event. There isn't a node that is this powerful at level 30, 33, or whatever whenever you finish the first lab. 30% move speed, 30% attack and cast speed, and then 20% increased damage is kind of whatever. But 30% attack and cast speed, since you are often getting around using shield charge, that attack speed's actually kind of nice. It's basically like an extra faster attack support, which is actually pretty good for like movement through the campaign. And then obviously 30% more move speed is huge. Like I would be just ripping through this area if I had another 30% move speed. But the main thing, of course, is 30% more spark. Cast speed is just crazy. That's like another I did throw a quality gem onto this at the end of the campaign, but that's, basically like another faster casting support throughout the entire campaign, which is amazing. Then after that, you really only have one choice in terms of what you would want to take next, and that's Stormy Seas. It'll convert all of your lightning damage into cold damage, meaning that you'll be able to double dip with some of the cold damage increases versus lightning damage increases that you can find around the tree. But more importantly, you just simply get chill and freeze, technically, on enemies, and then you also get your cold damage can shock, which is just really, really good for progressing through kind of the back half of the campaign. Just gives you a lot more control on enemies. And then you kind of have a choice on that final ascendancy. Either like you can take Glacial Wave and give yourself quite a bit of damage reduction and increased damage, potentially like 10% DR and 20% more damage out of Glacial Wave. I think that's pretty good. That's probably the safer bet. Or you can take Changing Seasons, take that reverse chill, give yourself potentially up to 30% increased action speed. That's pretty huge. I probably will do Glacial Wave first if I were doing this as my league starter, just for a little bit more safety. I'd kind of have to see how strong the chills I'm getting out of Stormy Seas are against the enemies I'm fighting in the campaign before I kind of made that decision one way or the other. Obviously, reverse chill is very strong, so getting even more speed through the campaign is pretty hard to argue against. Even just sitting here, I'm already kind of uncertain as to which way I would go. I think Changing Seasons maybe just simply for the speed increase alone. The only real downside to it is that you are reliant on being hit by enemies and actually being hit somewhat hard in order to get that reverse chill to, be fairly strong, whereas Glacial Wave's going to be pretty good in all situations, especially situations where you're sitting there and slamming on a boss in single target. That's really going to have, I think, more of a consistent impact. And then also GGG did drop the small passive nodes for the Ascendancy as a little teaser earlier today, just like shortly before I started ripping this out here. And Surfcaster's bonuses are both memes, chance to cause monsters to flee. This isn't necessarily a problem with Sparks, since you're able to fill the screen with Sparks. It's not really a problem, it's just sort of like free CC, I guess. Doesn't really have much impact, it doesn't work on rare or unique monsters. And then Rarity of Fish Caught, obviously a big meme. Both of these are big memes, that's okay. So in terms of the passive skill tree, I have a pretty detailed PoB that I've put together here. So let's just kind of start at level 1 and kind of work our way through how I would level this. I'm going to come out the top here, come and take Trickery. I'll start with Soul Siphon. You get a lot of mana and life on kill out of Soul and Blood Siphon. They're both pretty good. And then Elemental Focus is just kind of some free damage. And then I'd spend pretty much all of Act 2, or, first thing I'd try to do in Act 2 is come down and get Piercing Shots and the more proj speed Projectile Mastery, and then come down and get Ballistics and Charisma for the rest of Act 2 and work my way into Act 3. Something you can do very quickly in Act 3 as well is pick up Mark the Prey. This is actually pretty good. You're going to use Sniper's Mark throughout the campaign. This is a mistake that I made, not using Sniper's Mark very aggressively. In single target, it really just adds a lot of damage. And then you can take the Mark Mastery that gives you a chance to gain a Frenzy Charge, even if you're not doing charge stacking, which we're not yet. 3 Frenzy Charges is still 12% more damage and a good bit more. I think it's 12 or 16% more cast speed as well, or increased cast speed. But, good little damage increase, definitely better than anything you can get out of 4 points. So that's good, bit more life as well. Then after that, I like to come over to the Witch area. This just gives you a lot of cast speed with lightning skills, lightning damage, some light res. Technically speaking, you could take Frostwalker as well. I didn't put that point in, but, not a bad one. And then there's just a good bunch of quality of life here. Cast speed, free int, strength and dex and all res, and some stun, ignore, some increased mana, life. All of that is just really generically valuable, really helps through getting through the rest of the campaign there. And then after that, after having done that, I like to come down, get that increased skill effect duration, more skill effect duration, and then a bit of free Ellie res here from Sentinel, and that's around the time that you're gonna kind of be transitioning into the end of the campaign. At which point you're gonna want to come up and just kind of fill out the rest of this stuff. Take Heart of Ice, since at this point you will be able to, you'll have done your second ascendancy, second ascendancy and probably your third ascendancy. Moving on to Heart of Ice and Cold Mastery, getting extra damage on enemies if you've frozen them, that'll work really well together. Then I have just sort of this all works, this kind of middle of the Witch area works pretty well for a while, but then once you kind of transition into the Endgame, I would spec out of most of that once I'm able to afford it. Specking to more stuff over here, more like crit chance and ES Leech Mastery. You want to take Mage Bane, that'll give you a lot of spell suppression, and so then you can take the Evasion and ES Mastery that gives you evasion based on your int, and there's no downside to that. Then you can take Ghost Dance as well, so you're getting a lot of ES back from a combination of Leech and Ghost Dance, and you're also able to get some Life Leech in sort of a like early end game gear situation by running Barracks Grip. That'll give you a combination of like life and ES Leech, which will work really well. All right, so that's kind of the opening phases, opening weekend of the build. One thing, coming up here and taking Whispers of Doom and being able to use both a Mark and a regular Curse to shred some resistances is obviously good, but this is pretty standard stuff for any sort of like lightning damage spellcaster first weekend. This is maybe a little bit more advanced. If you're super fast, you can probably get to somewhere around this like level 92 range, opening weekend. That should be pretty achievable. And then this is a bit more of a juiced setup, and this is maybe a bit of more of a modern look of a power charge stacker, but it's a pretty normal power charge stacking setup. We've got Infuse, we got Instability. I think the only thing that would maybe be different if this was like a Witch setup is more stuff in this area, and then putting the Militant Faith up there. But since we're so kind of built up down here, Militant Faith actually gives us a lot more value down here, and this is a very juicy Militant Faith. We're getting Ellie Res and mana costs of skills out of this, and that is definitely good to get both of those. The main value though is just simply getting Inner Conviction. We are getting, if I am on the right gear setup here, there we go. We are getting quite a lot of damage, about 23% damage out of this node, since we are getting, a ton of power charges, and then we're completely sidestepping that downside of not being able to generate power charges by using Ralakesh. Over here, we have another bit of a nice technique where we use Unnatural Instinct in this area, and the only thing that we really lose is a bit of attack speed, which who cares? We get a bunch of really good stuff. We get some worthless link mana cost, who cares? But like some spell damage, some int, some dex, 3 move speed nodes is kind of nice, some cast speed, some mana regen, all of this stuff. And then more importantly, we're able to overlap that with the Light of Meaning, giving us 3% increased energy shield on all of the nodes that we've selected in here, and then all of the nodes that are being activated in this Unnatural Instinct wheel. We do have a Cluster Jewel over here as well, and Snowstorm, because we're doing lightning damage against shield enemies. We're able to basically just get 8% more damage out of this notable passive. It's quite strong. It's good enough to probably justify running 2 Cluster Jewels, but at least with the way I've got it set up, I'm just holding off on that, using some stuff like Prismatic Heart to fix resistances, and Doriani's Lesson to help a little bit with Leech. Now, my plan is, as this build kind of develops and kind of pushes into endgame, to transition this into a Chaos Inoculation build. I actually have that in the kind of like an end of the initial weekend setup. And then, obviously that would still be there in a higher level setup as well. But obviously we're going to be taking like some charge related stuff to just kind of get more power into the build in that high level setup. So I love charge stackers. They're probably my favorite archetype in PoE, and I think the reason why I like them is they offer an incredible amount of in-game power, and they are reliant pretty heavily on uniques, so there can be some difficult, like, expensive things. You don't need a Mage Blood, though. Not that it wouldn't hurt. Boy, it would help. But like a Ralakesh's Impatience is probably going to be the most expensive component of this build, and with people doing lots of charge or non-charge stacking builds, I should say, like stat stacking, mana stacking, and so on, I'm sure Ralakesh will be in demand. It's a great pair of boots, great unique. It's definitely going to be like the most expensive of all the uniques to get together, and the rest of the build really just isn't that expensive considering how much power it provides. So just to hit on some of the early end-game gear that I would play around with, I think Singularity is just really good for this build. Cast speed, flat lightning damage to spells, mana cost of spells, bit of free extra damage and hinder on enemies. Like, that's pretty cool. You could technically just dual wield these. I think maybe just running like a Sapphal's Frame kind of helps with resistances. It's not really all that special, but it's just like some free defense. So that's kind of what I would go with there. And then Barracks Grip is just like, like I mentioned before, it's life leech against shocked enemies, and it's a bit of free extra lightning damage as well. So that's pretty good. Also, it just synergizes really nicely in every possible way with the build early on when it's still kind of a hybrid life ES thing. And then Shravan's revelation here is, it's got a very long tooltip, but basically the way it works is when you put it in your left ring slot, you're no longer able to regen or recharge ES at all. You can only get it back through Leech or through Ghost Dance, which is fine because we have Ghost Dance and Leech, so that works. But what it does in return for that huge downside is it gives you basically like almost 50 mana per second if you aug this up, catalyst it up, which is huge. That fixes most of your mana problems. And it also gives you flat 250 ES, which is a massive amount of ES. So, you know, I suppose if you really wanted to min-max your ES at the expense of some mana regen, you could throw Tempering Catalysts onto this instead of Fertile ones. Kind of up to you which direction you want to go. Otherwise, the rest of this gear is just kind of basic. You know, it's life, energy, shield, evasion, spell suppression, resistances, all of that normal stuff. If you want to upgrade from the Singularity, but you're not quite ready to go over to the Power Charge stacking setup, you can just kind of shoot for like wands and shields that give you like cast speed, and then if you can get like projectile speed, spell damage, that sort of thing, that can work pretty well as well. So in terms of the Power Charge stacking uniques, we're combining Void Battery, which gives you power charges and spell damage per power charge with a pretty big downside on it, 80% reduced spell damage, with a Malachi's Loop, which has some pretty nasty downsides. Ralakesh's Impatience is giving you the effect of having all of the charges maxed out all the time, with really the only downside being that there's basically aren't really many other stats on those boots. You wear a Badge of the Brotherhood, and then this makes it so that your power charge maximum also copies over to your frenzy charge maximum. There are a couple of other bonuses on this, but they're not really that huge. The effective elusiveness on you is increased per power charge, is something you can technically take advantage of if you flesh and flame your way into Mistwalker. That's actually a really huge defensive layer and a pretty big amount of mobility as well, but you know, it's kind of a big like damage loss to do that. We're still using Shav's Revelation, that's the same. But now we're going to use Anathema in our right ring slot, and that'll give us, you know, it gives us a mint and cast speed, but mostly it's about just making your curse limit be equal to your power charge limit. We have like 10 power charges, so you just have infinite curses, so that makes that really easy. And then we're using Graven's Secret, which comes from the Maven. And what this does is it makes it so that your power charge generation, essentially, instead generates absorption charges. What this does is this gives you 12% of elemental damage recouped as energy shield per charge. So this can go over 100%, which means that when you take elemental damage over the next 4 seconds, you will regenerate 120% of that damage back as ES. So since we're playing a Chaos Inoculation build, we essentially just have 120% recoup. So as long as we don't get bursted down, we effectively can't die to elemental damage anymore, which is pretty amazing. And one other thing that's very nice about this is that recoup, as far as I understand, doesn't shut off if you hit full energy shield or life or whatever. It will continue to apply for those 4 seconds. So recoup, especially with this whole setup, is quite good. And then it gives us a lot of other stats that are all fine. As for the flasks, you know, this is just pretty standard like damage-oriented stuff. Bottled Faith, Quartz Flask, Jade, Silver, Quicksilver, all of that normal stuff. And now I'm just going to touch on the skills. So I have broken this into 3 tabs here. One for the campaign, very basic Spark setup, kind of some recommendations for early. And then as you get them, you want to swap over to like Faster Proj and Spell Echo. And then you might want to drop Faster Casting or Faster Proj or something for inspiration if you feel the need to. But you could get away with just running like Faster Casting, Faster Proj, and Spell Echo for the whole campaign. Inspiration Sarah is an option. Hypothermia Sarah is an option if you want a bit more like control over your mana pool or control over the monsters. Orb of Storms, this is basically just here for Act 1. Frostblink, you can use that the whole campaign. Clarity, you can use that the whole campaign. And then Herald of Thunder and Ice, you can use for Act 2. You can keep Herald of Thunder for the whole campaign pretty much, but Herald of Ice is more for Act 2, and you know, unless you like the Herald of Ice pops. Sniper's Mark, you're going to want to lock that in and just use that on all the bosses and like big, beefy rares you fight throughout the campaign. And then, you know, I have a pretty like generic setup here for kind of early on in the end game. Sigil of Power, Frost Shield, both hooked up to a more duration support. Sigil of Power and Frost Shield are both just like good things to throw down whenever you're fighting like a rare, you know, big rare, or really more like a boss. As for the gems on your main spell link, I don't have Energy Leech on here, and I specifically mentioned or put this here because I wanted to talk about it. Energy Leech is something that's normally in a Trickster Spark setup because you have Soul Drinker, and you can get this through Flesh and Flame. I think what I've gone for through Flesh and Flame is Deadly Infusion. This one is the one that would give, I think, the most amount of damage on a budget. You could go for Unstable Infusion instead, or I mean, like Polymath or Soul Drinker or whatever. These could all be really good. If you're able to get Soul Drinker, get that Trickster Overleech, then you would want to run Energy Leech, because Energy Leech gives you more damage when you're on full ES and while you're leeching ES. And the thing is that normally those are mutually exclusive. You can't be leeching more if you're on full. Trickster removes that, so that's why it is so good. But that is why we're not running it here, because by default we're not going to have that Trickster Overleech, so we're actually not going to get that much value out of Energy Leech support. Spell Echo, faster casting, faster proj, these are all still great. Inspiration is still great. Hypothermia is great. So that's what I'm going to run for my standard 6-link until I'm like fully min-maxed. Otherwise, all pretty normal stuff. You know, I have a recommendation of a bunch of curses to link together and potentially take care of an enemy if you manage to get an anathema ring and you have more than 4 curses available, 3 curses available. But otherwise, you know, if you're just using Whispers of Doom, then Sniper's Mark and Frostbite, I think, are going to be the 2 you're going to want to go for. And then the auras, you know, pretty standard auras: Grace, Discipline, Clarity, Herald of Thunder. You know, exactly how that mana regen kind of works out for you. You might want to dial in your Clarity level accordingly. And then just like a cast when damage taken, set up like Mortal Call, Tornado, Wave of Conviction, that could all work as well. You know, all pretty normal stuff. And then for the ultra in-game setup, this is where things kind of tweak around a little bit, where we would want to run kind of some really, really fancy gloves that I'll kind of get into crafting here in a second. And so we would just do like a 4-link in the gloves with some supports coming from the Shaper Elder gloves, and then we have Spark, Spell Echo, Power Charge on crit, and Hypothermia working together. And we need that Power Charge on crit so that we can generate the absorption charges from Graven's Secret. Other than that, most of the rest of the auras and curses are all pretty much the same. The one thing that I changed here is I did, because the body armor's kind of freed up, I put a full 6-link of curses hooked up to Arcanist Brand in the body armor, and then I linked those to Inspiration to kind of help with the mana of it all a little bit. And then another thing I kind of wanted to go for here was a Clarity Watcher's Eye, and I think that's something that you could definitely want to try to push for kind of earlier on. Getting a non-channeling skills have minus mana cost while affected by Clarity will really help a lot with mana cost, which can obviously be very high depending on your setup. Yeah, it can be quite a lot. You definitely are going to need to do like quite a bit to take care of the mana. I think that's the biggest concern I have in this setup with the reverse chill, giving you so much action speed. I think making the mana work and not having to use a mana flask is definitely the biggest like scary thing about the whole build for me. Really about the only thing that I'm worried about, because I think the defenses are pretty amazing. Combination of like ES Leech and Ghost Dance and Suppression and Evasion and blah, 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 blah. All of the rest of everything, a pretty decent ES pool. And then a ton of damage. All of that seems good. But the only thing that has me just the slight, like, at all concerned is making the mana work. All right, now let's talk about how to craft the gloves. So in order to get the gloves to have this, the faster casting speed, Shaper suffix, and then the Elder prefix that grants faster proj, the way that you would get this is you would start out with a pair of Shaper or Elder gloves that's on a base you like. Doesn't really matter which. Then you would take a pair of any kind of gloves that have the other influence on them. You would use an Awakener's Orb to destroy the first pair of gloves and then apply that influence to the second. And that's sort of the first step. Then you just want to roll them. You want to roll them with Essences of Horror. And you just craft these. You know, they give you crit chance to socketed gems. And you just want to spam these, which can obviously get quite expensive, until you get 2 things. 1, you need to get whatever tier you're willing to settle for of the faster casting suffix, the Shaper suffix, and then you also need a free suffix as well. So if I were to roll these, for example, I would just have to annul and hope that I got lucky and hit the mana cost there. And then you also need a free prefix. So you would craft Suffixes Cannot Be Changed, which is a prefix, and then you would harvest Reforge Caster, and there's only one mod that can be applied when you do this, as long as you have that faster casting mod there. And that would be the Socketed Spell Gems have 50%, it's 30 as a tier 3, 50% as a tier 2, and 70% as a tier 1, the crit multiplier. There you go, the suffixes are basically locked in. Now, because we got lucky and we didn't get filled up prefixes, we're just going to craft another suffixes cannot be changed and harvest reroll speed. And what we're hoping to get is faster proj, increased proj speed, and then to not get, if I can find it here, the shaper mod, this one's slower proj. If we were to get that, we would either have to basically just like, if we had a free prefix still, we could craft suffixes can't be changed and just do the harvest reforge again and hope we didn't get it a second time. If we didn't have a free prefix, we would have to annul. So we're good here. We're lucky on this front. Great. So what we can do now is we can just craft the vol mod proj, can pierce an extra target and +1 to level of socketed gems. We can kind of like wimp out, or we can go big. We've already spent a ton of money and time making this, so we can, suffixes can't be changed, and then unveil and hope that we don't hit the nice prefix. Unfortunately, we did, so we'd have to harvest reforge again. And then again, suffixes can't be changed and hit them with a veil. Unlucky. In practicing this, I got lucky every single time, but yeah, obviously this could run you quite a bit. All right, the thing bugged out on me for a second there. Okay, so we have our veiled prefix, we have our other prefix, it's good. So now we just want to block, and we can kind of block anything. I think just blocking like evasion and ES and life is fine. And then we just want to unveil. And what we're hoping for is proj, pierce an additional target, and we were lucky enough to get that. And then at that point, the last thing that you want to craft in here is just simply increase damage while leeching. And that's pretty much that. I guess technically speaking, you would probably want to divine until you have like very nice rolls on your increased proj and cast speed. There we go. Those look great. And then, you know, finish off by fully crafting out the increased damage while leeching. And then of course, Blessed Orb that up to tier 16, or to 16%, I should say, max roll, which was the hardest part of the whole process. And there you go. There you go. Some insanely good gloves, and all it took was probably a couple hundred divines to craft. Now, those definitely aren't necessary to make the build work. You know, I'm getting 7 million DPS per spark hit, closer to like 30 million total DPS out of that. Out of a power charge stacker. I feel pretty good about that. I really like this build a lot. I think it's going to be a lot of fun to put together. Really just a fun, fast league starter that will absolutely shred maps. The potential to turn this into a generic charge stacking build that can use Spark, but just as easily swap over to something like Stormbrand or pretty much any other lightning skill is really appealing as well. I have one more build idea cooked up. It's not as in-depth as this one. Honestly, I'm not sure which one I want to go with. I definitely spent more time on this one than anything else. I was sure it was this, but I don't know. I'm really just still thinking about it. Alright, that's it. Be sure to like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video and you want to see more like it. And if you want to support us even further, consider becoming a channel member. Thanks for watching and have fun fishing. Bye.